Hello, scholars. I thought I'd take a little bit of time and talk with you about a few things. We've been talking a lot about exemplary teaching and what it is and is not. And I think one of the most important things to think about is that exemplary teachers are the teachers who are successful even and especially where other teachers are not. Now, this does not mean that the other teachers are not good people or that they have bad morals or they don't care about minoritized people or anything about that. It simply means that when we have schools like Woodrow Wilson or schools here in Mobile where the schools tend to be talked about as, quote, zoos, where you have a lot of school failure and children maybe not doing well on test scores. The trajectory to going to college isn't that high. Um, and when we think about failing schools, we tend to have this idea in our head about what that means about the children. But what we're here really to explore in this class is the idea that really all children can learn. So if there's not learning going on in the class, whether it's a class of seniors getting ready to graduate from high school or a class of preschoolers, that all children really can and will learn. So if they're not learning, then something's happening in the classroom. And I'm not one to be pointing fingers at anybody for sure, but what I do want to say is if teaching and learning is not successful in the classroom, then the adults in the room are the ones who are in charge and need to make something happen. And a lot of times that it's not happening is not because the teachers themselves don't care or even the administrators, but a lot of times it's because they do not always know how or what to do. So the point being that there are these exemplary teachers who are successful where other teachers continue to fail. So I've done a lot of research myself and worked with a lot of future teachers. And my most recent future teachers have been here in Mobile, Alabama. And what we have here is we have some schools that are 100% to like 98 or 99.9% black, and they're often in very economically poor neighborhoods, and they aren't known for their academic rigor. So when I was working with future teachers, I was looking for exemplary teachers to put my future teachers in those classrooms because I wanted the future teachers to know that truly all children can and will learn if their teachers will set the rooms up and approach teaching and learning in ways that are productive for them. So when I started sending future teachers out into the schools here in Mobile, Alabama, I got a lot of resistance because there are certain areas of the city and the county that people often are afraid to go in. And even if they are, say, middle class black people, they might be afraid to go in those sorts of areas. So, one thing about me is I'm pretty bold and I will go into a lot of places. And it's not that I'm foolhardy, it's that I'm aware that statistics often are that it is white on black crime or black on black crime, but it's rarely black on white crime. So, usually, when I venture into these communities, a lot of times people will think that I'm lost or that I'm just naive, or they'll have all kinds of reasons, but they're generally very kind to me and very patient with me, almost like a lost puppy that needs to be taken back home. And so I've had a good lot of good luck and done a lot of work in communities and partnered up with a lot of people from the communities because I have been bold about making connections across social lines with people who are different from me. And so when I was putting future teachers out into these all black schools, and our future teachers were almost all white as well, and most of, just like it in Cedar City, most of the teachers who go to the university in the teacher preparation program, they generally end up teaching somewhere in that region, in that city or that state. Same thing in Alabama. So, what was happening was that a lot of people were afraid to go out to these schools. They saw they had all kinds of stereotypes about going into the hood or the ghetto or all kinds of things. And they were very fearful of these images that they had in their heads, which they didn't make up themselves but circulate in our in media about these neighborhoods being very scary places. So I had identified classrooms where there were exemplary teachers. So these teachers would be in these quote tough schools, and they would be very successful with their students. These students might move to their next block and or next teacher, and all chaos may break out because the situation wasn't set up well for them. And kids are like dogs. They understand when somebody's afraid of them, and they sometimes will take advantage of that, whether they should or shouldn't. And so the point being that it wasn't the children that changed. What changed was the teachers and how they approached teaching. So if you have this school that's called a zoo by people that they're like, well, I wouldn't send my children there, or I'm afraid to go in there myself. And then you have a lot of teachers who are failing. Then you have these other teachers, these exemplary teachers, who come into the exact same situation and they are successful. So, what is it about their teaching approach that makes them successful? And it's like we've talked about before, there's a pattern that exemplary teachers have. They're not cookie cutters, so it's not like a recipe where I can say, well, put this poster on the wall, wear this t shirt, or make sure you have this tattoo, or something like that. Maybe you have to have a tattoo. No, no, you don't have to have a tattoo. You don't have to have a certain poster. There's no cookie cutter recipe for it. So, what it is that these exemplary teachers, they tend to have these kind of principles, if you will, that they operate from. And some of you really captured it well when you were talking about this sense of urgency. They often do have a sense of urgency. They're very focused on the students and the context of the children, and drawing the children's gifts and talents and resiliency and their brilliance out of them. So they want them to excel, so they focus on high levels of academic achievement. And then they want the children to be able to walk in both worlds. They want them to be able to be at home, like the butterflies girl. Remember that story with the cabbage, and the teacher said butterflies are beautiful? Or what about Matthew's teacher? So Matthew has to be able to work in a classroom where he's got traditional knowledge. He's got to be able to pass the the standardized tests, and we can talk all about how those standardized tests uh, became part of schooling, and how their roots are actually very, very racist, and were actually rooted in eugenics, which was the idea, literally, that white people were biologically and genetically smarter than other groups of people. That's the foundation that standardized testing came out of. If you look up the history of it, you'll find roots in Indiana. You'll find roots of it in California at Stanford. And so the whole notion of standardized testing, we can dig into that and show how over time it was used to rationalize the whole exclusion of whole groups of people. And so, but you and I, we don't have choices about that right now, right? Nobody asked me if I wanted standardized testing. If I did, I don't even want grading. So, but nobody asked me, right? So, and they didn't ask you either. So, testing and grades, that you have to do that regardless of where it came from. So, these exemplary teachers, they will focus, laser focus on high levels of academic achievement, but they're not trying to make the children into their own white image. You know, Matthew's teacher was humble enough to be able to listen to Matthew's dad, and to be able to understand that Matthew needed to be able to walk in both worlds, right? So Matthew was in a situation where it was kind of the whole historical tradition of kill the Indian, save the man. And so his teacher had a good heart, right? Frank Fingerson has a good heart, and he wanted Matthew to succeed, and he was frustrated because he wanted Matthew to succeed, but he didn't understand that he was trying to subtract Matthew's sense of self out and trying to make Matthew into his own image. And we see that with the butterflies story teacher too, where we don't know how she carried on, but we do know that when she told the little girl that butterflies are beautiful and we don't kill them, we know that she didn't know anything about the community that the child came from. Her grandparents did. Her grandparents very much knew how to walk in both worlds. And the little girl needs to know that too. But the person who's in a position of power here is the butterfly girl's teacher, not the grandparents, not the little girl. You know, the grandparents, if they really wanted to cause some disruption and do things, they'd have to meet with other grandparents, with other parents. They'd have to talk with the school board. They'd have to do all kinds of things, but they aren't the ones that sign the paycheck for the teacher. They're not the ones who make the state laws and policies. They don't work at the school board. So they're in a more vulnerable position, okay? But they do understand walking successfully in two worlds. That's why they told their granddaughter, do what your teacher says, right? So the parents and grandparents want their children to walk in both worlds. The teachers are the critical element here. Frank Fingerson was able to hear what the parent was saying, and trying to help Matthew to be able to walk in both worlds. Okay, and we hope that happened with the butterfly story too. So walking in both worlds, that's something that you and I do all the time, kind of intuitively. When we go with our friends, we have a different register of speaking. We have a different way of interacting if we're at the club or we're at a funeral, right? We know how to switch these registers. Okay, but a lot of times children don't necessarily know that. And a lot of times the isolation will be such that if you don't have money, like when I was teaching on the west side of Salt Lake, you needed a dependable car to get across the bridge to go into the downtown area. For the most part, people lived, worked, and went to church on the west side of the city, and they didn't necessarily cross over into Salt Lake and head to the east side of the foothills. So you not only needed a dependable car to do that, but often, what was the reason to that when your community was over here? And besides that, you never want the students to think that there's something wrong with their community, because there's not. There's nothing that says yours as reflecting the white middle class institutions and background. That didn't come from the heavens as this stamped better. Right, there's other ways of doing it, and people, human beings, create many things, so we decide what's better and what's not. So high levels of academic achievement, high levels of cultural competency, so that children are able to walk in both worlds. The third principle is the one that's often very tricky for teachers to understand, and it does take a little bit of getting your head around it. And that's that kind of so what part that Dr. Ladson Billings talked about. And we watched a video of Dr. Dorinda where they were actually trying to send her to special education where she's actually gifted. So she talked to us about that. Well, this third one is the socio-political. It is tricky to get your head around, but I know that with a little bit of kind of thinking on it, you can get your head around what it is too. Now, I'm not telling you what you have to believe or not believe. I'm just going to try to explain it for you. There are a lot of things that I can explain and discuss and have a compelling conversation about, but I don't necessarily believe in. That's I'm not trying to tell you what you need to believe in. Okay, and the way that I want to do that is I have this book that I would like to share with you, and it's called Dear Willie Rudd. Okay, and the person who wrote it is Libba Moore Gray. Okay, and the pictures, it was illustrated by Peter M. Fiore. Okay, so it's called Dear Willie Rudd. Okay, and we're going to focus on that third principle of exemplary teaching. Okay, so it's not too long, but I would appreciate it if you would be patient with me and enjoy this southern story here. Okay, Miss Elizabeth felt troubled. She went out on the front porch and sat in her grandmother's big green wicker rocker, and she rocked and she rocked and she rocked. This is somewhere down here in the south. She put her head back and closed her eyes. She could smell the perfume from the blossoms on the tall magnolia trees. See, I knew it was down here in the south. I have a magnolia tree outside too. She could hear the bees buzzing around the azalea bushes in the front yard. She could hear the mourning doves, the color of evening, cooing in the backyard. And Miss Elizabeth remembered. She remembered all the way back 50 years when she was a very little girl. Now, I know my elementary school kids thought, whoo, she's old. She was remembering back 50 years. She remembered Willie Rudd, now surely gone to heaven if anyone ever has. She remembered the feel of Willie's big lap covered with a flowered apron, the feel of Willie's generous bosom against her cheek. She remembered Willie's songs rumbling up through her large body and out her mouth. Hush, hush, somebody calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody calling my name. Come up, my child, on my right hand and look and see the promised land. Hush, hush. Oh, yes, somebody calling my name. She remembered her wearing leather shoes, split on the sides to comfort those feet that used to give her such miseries. She remembered her on her knees, scrubbing the patterned linoleum floor. that. Miss Elizabeth opened her eyes and stood up. She went into the house and got her pen and her best writing paper with the flowers on the border. And then she sat down and she wrote. Dear Willie Rudd, I'm writing this letter for my mother and for my grandmother and for me. I'm writing to say thank you. I'm writing to say I'm sorry for anything any one of us might have done to make you sad. Most of all, I'm writing to say I wish you could come to see me once again. This time you would come in my front door, not my back door. You could eat with me at our polished table, on the good china, not in the kitchen alone. We could go to the movies and sit together in the front row. We could ride in the bus, and you would sit in the front seat with me beside you. We could sit on the front porch and sing songs, and I would bring you sweet tea in my grandmother's crystal glass. Then I could see you to the door and hug you goodbye and say, "Come again soon, Willie Rudd. I miss you, Elizabeth. P.S. I never told you I love you, and I do." Then Miss Elizabeth folded the letter and tied it to a shiny red kite. She walked slowly to the top of the hill, and when the wind had grown strong enough so that her gray hair blew back from her face, she let go, kite and all. After a bit, Miss Elizabeth walked back down the hill and sat in the big rocker on the front porch. The sun was going down. The moon was coming up. She could smell the perfume from the blossoms on the magnolia tree. The sound of the bees around the azalea bushes was growing fainter and fainter. The morning doves, the color of evening, called to each other in the backyard. And Miss Elizabeth rocked and rocked and rocked. Okay, I'll let you just think about that for a moment. Okay. What do you think? Maybe take a minute and pencil a few thoughts down as far as what do you think was going on in this book? As far as we know, I mean, she's probably my age or my husband's age. So, and having, taught down here in the South, I'm sure I've had many students who have been, who are younger than I am and have had housekeepers, and they will say, it's kind of a story like this where they love the person and they were very close to them, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's wonderful that human beings can form bonds with each other across very different and complex and sometimes very contradictory situations. No doubt about that. That's been going on since probably the beginning of recorded history and before that. But what you see here is this is Miss Elizabeth and when she was a little girl, right? And she's remembering back to her childhood, and she's saying to her housekeeper, Miss Willie Rudd, she's saying, I'm sorry about what was happening. I know that it was a time of racial segregation, and you took care of me, and you had to be our housekeeper, and you had to sit in the kitchen by yourself while we ate in the main room, and you prepared our food, and you had to ride at the back of the bus, and you had to watch the movies in a different part of the movie theater. Now, all those things are very real. Even my husband, who's 62 now, he remembers these sort of things. Even though the desegregation of schools, the um, the ruling came down in the 50s. It wasn't until the 70s where actually things were starting to move. So he definitely remembers the desegregation of the schools here in Mobile. So, and he remembers, and his parents certainly remember when, the people weren't able to drink from the same drinking fountains. Many of the ladies that I'm Catholic, and so the Roman Catholics, we have Black Catholic parishes, and many of the older ladies who are in their like 70s, 80s, 90s, but definitely in their 70s, they remember not being able to sit in the front pews of the cathedral downtown, which is like a Mormon ward. They remember, not being able to go vote unless they paid their poll tax. So they remember all these things. It wasn't really that long ago. One of my good friends, she remembers that when she was little, her mother would bring in her purse a bottle of water. Now, this was long before we had bottled water that you could just buy from the cases, because she's in her 70s now. But her mother didn't want her drinking from the fountain that would say colored, and so she would bring along water in her purse, like in a canning jar, and she would open that up and let the children have it. So, so at that time, you would see signs that said colored. Now we don't say colored anymore. Um, uh, we will say people of color, but even that, that's not the same as the N word or some of these other words. But my point being that wasn't that long ago. So, but Miss Elizabeth here, she's clearly a good person, right? She feels bad about that. She wants to go back and say sorry. And even when she was a child, she was born into that. She didn't create that, she didn't make it up. She inherited the world that she was born into. And certainly as a child, we can't hold her responsible for that. So now as an adult, though, she's writing the story to kind of try to make things right. But notice here that she's kind of writing it from the perspective as, I love you, I care about you, and I'm sure that she does. No question about that. I never question what's in people's heart. If they tell me that's in their heart, then I believe it. And I usually assume that it's that people are good, that they have something good in their heart. But it's not really about that, right? It's not about this, nice interaction. What she doesn't realize, even as an adult, like, even the book is called Dear Willie Rudd. Now, if you were here even right now today in the South, I would never, ever, ever call a person who is older than I am Willie Rudd. They would always be Miss Rudd or ma'am. You would never, ever, ever just call her Willie Rudd. So, uh, you know, that right there, that's disrespectful right there. And there's a long history of that, where older black women were called auntie, and even grown adult men were called boy for a long time. And so you would never ever, it was like it was on purpose to not call adult black people by their titles. And so now, today, if I'm walking around in my neighborhood, if it's somebody who's younger than me, a child, I might call them, I might call them, I like to her, she's probably my age. I would call her, hey Elizabeth. But even I don't know her that well, so I'd probably call her Miss Elizabeth. Um, you know, for all of you, if you were down here, you would for sure always call me doctor. You would never call me my first name. So just, but in different parts of the country, that's obviously very different. I went through my graduate program and I never called my professors by anything but their first names. So that can be very different. But if you think about what is in this story and what the pattern is with that particular group, and you know that historically there was a pattern of calling even adult um, black people as auntie or uncle or something like that, but they were never, they were even boy as a full grown man, they were never given their title or respect. That was a way of putting them down. And so, you would not do that. So that's kind of interesting that she thinks that it's just about this kind of interpersonal relationship. So she even calls the book Dear Willie Rudd, which tells me that she hasn't really learned anything about it at all. She thinks, well, if I have a warm, fuzzy feeling and you have a warm, fuzzy feeling, we're good. But that's not what this historical, socio-political awareness is about. It's about understanding these patterns. And even for myself, like when as a teacher educator, and a lot of my future teachers were young black people. So I had some athletes in my class, and I was definitely older than them. And so I had a one young man in my class named David, and as an athlete they travel a lot, so they were missing a lot of class. He was missing a lot of class. And for me, anybody who's like 30 and below, like you're a kid, you're very young. And even it was, I was, in my mid 40s at that time. And so, he was definitely like 22, 23. So he was definitely a youngster. But as someone who's white in a position of authority, for me to call him boy, like, where is that boy? And I had no malintent. I wasn't trying to stigmatize black people. I wasn't trying to, I was just thinking about all people under 30 as very youthful. As soon as I said, well, where's David? Where is that boy? As soon as I said that, a whole big went up from all of my black students. And, I realized that I had stepped right into that pattern that's going on right here. So it wasn't really about what was in my heart or what my intention was or anything. It was that being oblivious for the moment for of what those historical patterns of inequality are, and what my group of people has done to ensure that other groups stayed down. So luckily, I had enough of a relationship built with them that it was something that we could work through and talk about. But every time we speak and we interact, history is with us. Our bodies are carried with us. The relationship between men and women, between racial groups, religious groups, sexuality, all those historical things come to bear. How I speak English, all these things come to bear in that moment as we're expressing them. And so when you're part of the minoritized group, you're sensitive to that. And of course, for us in the United States, we're socialized that now we're not supposed to see color, we're not supposed to talk about these things, but we do see it. Birds, um, fish, and human beings. Actually, we do see color, we do see things. So when we say that we don't see it, we're either lying, or we assume that something is bad. So our social norms in our society say, well, don't say anything about race. See no race, hear no race, speak no race, feel no race, right? That's our society. So right then and there, I'm in the classroom, and I'm saying things like white, black. So everybody's already a little uncomfortable because they've all been socialized just like you have. We don't talk about race. But only in a racist society would it be that you don't want to talk about something that you clearly do see, if you're assuming that it's a bad thing. Because like, if you pretend that you don't see that I identify as a woman, well, what are you seeing? You don't see me. I don't try to hide that, or pretend that I'm not trying to be something that I'm not. So if you're trying to pretend that you don't see it, it sends a message to me that you think it's bad, and I don't think it's bad. I actually embrace being a woman. I embrace being white. I embrace who I am. I didn't choose this body, but I was born into it, and I embrace it. So I take responsibility for my actions and for my speech. And when I make errors, then I do, so occasionally I do hurt people's feelings. I try to address that. But here you see where it's not simply about people's feelings being hurt, but it's about these historical patterns and being aware of them. And then you look at it, and she's saying, and Elizabeth is saying, well, your feet hurt. Could Well, yeah, because she was on her feet all the time. She was cleaning somebody else's house. So think about how the socioeconomic hierarchy in the United States has historically worked, where particularly if you were black, you could teach or you could preach. For a lot of black women, they were housekeepers. I know my mother-in-law did laundry for white people for a very long time. So these things are very real. And so Elizabeth isn't looking at, like, well, why was it that the structural thing was her family had the ability and the socioeconomic positioning to even have a housekeeper, right? And so the options for Miss Willie Rudd weren't the same as for Elizabeth and her family. And so for her to, think that it was just about coming to the front room to eat off the good china, it doesn't look at the issues of, well, why was Willie Mae, why was Miss Willie actually having to be a housekeeper at all, right? There weren't a lot of options for her. What kind of schooling opportunities did she have? What kind of employment opportunities did she have? So just, and even for her to think about, the privilege of her to have an adult walk around every day, all day, thinking that this adult, best thing would be to spend the day going around with this child, right? Like, if it wasn't for a paycheck, she would probably be doing something else. This doesn't mean that she did not actually, yeah, she loved the child, but but it's not necessarily just about the warm fuzzy feelings, but how structurally she was positioned. So this one, she was positioned that she could have a housekeeper and an adult that was accompanying her all the time to take care of her needs and so on. And so she was economically in a privileged position. Now, if she had the same economic means, well, she probably wouldn't spend her whole day, going to the movies with her or something like that. She probably has other things that she would like to do with her own family, right? And so the inequity of the structures is what is at issue here. So it's not simply about just being nice or what's in your heart. They both have good hearts, right? I think we can presume that they both have good hearts. They do love each other. I'm sure that Miss Willie did love Elizabeth. I'm quite sure of that. When you care for a child and help to raise them, I mean, I think it would be hard not to love that child. And for her, I'm sure that she did love her. Here is someone who was caring for her. So I don't question their hearts at all. I know that they did love each other. But what I want you to see is that it's about much more than about these kind of interpersonal, I have warm, fuzzy feelings and you have warm, fuzzy feelings. It's much more than that. That friendship and love and having a good heart, good intentions, these things are not enough. That doesn't address the structural issues. And so when exemplary teachers are addressing their students, they are fully aware of these larger contextual things. They're fully aware that it's more than just I care about you and you care about me. That's important. Don't get me wrong. That is important. I have to make a bond with you. If you are my student and I think I'm going to teach you without having you feel some sort of respect and care coming from me, that's not about to happen, right? If you feel threatened or you feel anxious or you feel there's all kinds of these negative emotions that can get in the way and hinder learning. For optimal learning, you really need to feel secure and cared about and that I believe in you. So all of those things, which I do believe in you, all of those things are very important to communicate. At the same time, just having warm, fuzzy feelings between the two of us, it isn't enough. We have to look at those kind of structural things that are the larger patterns out there and be aware of it. So when you see exemplary teachers, they are aware of it. They are very much aware of it. For example, when I'm teaching girls, I'm very aware that girls tend to be funneled away from math and science. So I am very clear about that sociopolitical reality about girls being funneled away from math and science. So I start when I'm teaching and I'm talking and working with girls, I make a big point to be very clear that it's not just the boys that are going to be doing math and science. Sometimes girls will want to participate in their own exclusion. They'll be like, ew, I can't touch that. I'm not good at math. I can't do numbers. And I work against that. I want them to have every opportunity. And sometimes teachers will do things like they will call on boys more often than they will girls. Girls are to be seen and not heard. And so I'm very conscious of those kind of things when I'm working with students and I'm working with women and girls because I know that there's historically been a privileging of men. Not to say that men are bad people, certainly not. But that men have been had education kind of tailored to them, had more opportunities, are kind of seen as the leaders, and women have historically had what kind of education? It's about how to become good housekeepers, to be good, to embroider, to sing, often to be good objects of attention for men, to serve men well. So their function was more supplementary. Historically, that's been the education. Women weren't even allowed in universities. Like when Thomas Jefferson was designing the University of Memphis, his daughters and granddaughters were never allowed. They could visit, but they could not enroll in classes. Where Thomas Jefferson Randolph, President Jefferson's grandson, he took classes at the university. So historically, that's not been what the role of women has been. So I'm aware of that. I work against that. I work to kind of equal the playing field so that girls are right in there. They're getting this message that they should be nurses and pink colored jobs like teachers. But and I love being a teacher, don't get me wrong, but I also want them to know that they could be an astronaut, an engineer, a chemist, or whatever it is, that all options are open to them too. So, high levels of academic achievement, I want them to be able to walk in both worlds. And I'm fully aware of those patterns of exclusion, and I'm going to take those into account, and I'm going to try to open those doors for you. So whether it's an economic class, whether it's primary language, whether it's racial things, whether it's religious background, whatever it is, that there's been patterns of exclusion, that third principle, it's not just about what's in my heart. That's important, it is, but it's not enough. You have to address those socio-political historical patterns. Does that make sense? Okay. Hope you enjoyed that.